Welcome, Carl.
Hello, Michael. What's your middle name?
Ernest.
Michael Ernest Kitces. Let's go.
Wow,
Let's go.
I feel like I'm in trouble now. Like all three names is never good.
David Carl Richards the third. That's my mom.
Oh boy.
The
It's got to
third.
be real trouble if you get the third on there.
For sure. For sure.
So Carl 3. I'm just call you C3 now. So last episode we were talking about this kind of transitioning from I have these review meetings. They've been mostly portfolio based for a long time. Now I'm trying to talk more about planning stuff. Like we started talking about how you do that transition and what you say in that meeting. We mostly really talked about just what you say in that meeting, how you create an agenda, what kind of stuff you would cover on the agenda, what are the core issues that that clients really want answered or want to talk about. But I wanted to come back to the part that we kind of touched on early in the last episode, but I feel like we never really fully dug into, which is just this awkward phenomenon of how you start introducing planning conversations to long-term existing clients where, we're in our routine, they come in there once a year, we pull out the statement or the report, we talk performance, portfolio stuff. It wraps up. I wish them on their way to see them next year. I want to make this a more planning-centric meeting. I want to engage them further. But I find particularly with existing clients, like there's sort of two challenges here. One is just like, what does this meeting look like and what do we talk about? So we covered that last time. And the other is, how do you actually like introduce this with a client that you may now have been working with for 3, 5, 7, 10 years, where you can't start off with a conversation like, so let's see how you're doing on your goals, because we haven't really talked about them much or at all, because I didn't really do that stuff 9 years ago when you first came on board, but we've been working together for 9 years, right? Like, I feel bad if I'm in a conversation with someone for like 8 seconds and I realize I don't know their name because we're 8 seconds in the conversation. Now it's really awkward to be like, oh, and by the way, what's your name? I forgot your name. Like, we can't do that once you get past a certain moment in a conversation. We're like 9 years into a client relationship. It's like,
Right.
oh, by the way, what were your goals? And
Your goals.
how old are your kids? And
Yeah. Yeah.
how do you reopen this conversation without basically demonstrating that, like, sometimes we don't always know everything about all of our clients? To be fair, sometimes that's, like, I'm not necessarily saying anyone's a bad advisor. Sometimes clients weren't that open.
Right.
Sometimes it's a client from a long time ago, and we weren't as advice and planning centric back then. It's like lots of reasons. I'm not necessarily trying to say I want to be a bad advisor, but just like, this is a real world challenge of, if you haven't been that deep with clients, how do you suddenly start having this conversation in a like real relationship so that you don't just get clients like, why are you asking me? And for that matter, why don't you already know this about me?
Right. It's such a good question. It comes up all the time. So I'm really, really glad that we get a chance to talk about it, because there's a really simple way to do this. Because everything you've said is totally true.
I like simple. I'm good.
Yeah, everything you've said is totally true. Like, it's a big thing. It feels like a huge, big thing. And I think there's a very simple way to solve it. But let's just acknowledge the idea. First of all, there is no judgment in your question. Like, there's a million reasons this could have happened this way. The entire industry was built around performance reporting. We've trained people that that's what they want. And suddenly we're trying to sort of change what can feel suddenly to a client, even if we've been thinking about it for 8 years. It can feel sudden. So I think there's a reasonable way to detox people off of that. It's a little bit like the financial pornography detox that we've talked about. So here's the simple way to do it. Next time they come in for a meeting, if you've got a client that was primarily performance-based, maybe even product-based, sort of a legacy client, and you're just trying to shift your whole business this direction. Next time they come in for a meeting, prepare your normal agenda, right? And just leave 15 minutes at the end. You're going to set the stage for I don't think you do it in this meeting. You set the stage for the next meeting in this meeting.
Okay. So that's important context. So 15
Yep.
minutes at the end of this meeting to make the next one more planning centric.
Yeah, and it might need to be even more like a half an hour. And what you're going to do is you're going to go through what you normally go through. And you might, like you might say, like we talked about earlier, you send out the agenda, you say, look, here's this, this, and this. It might even just say, agenda item number 4, important conversation, or discussion of goals. Might say something, something simple like that. When you get there, you just say, listen, Michael, I know we've been working together for 7 years. And I want to have a conversation about sort of where, like, the work we do together, and you don't need to make this too heavy. Just look, we've been working together for 7 years, and I wanted to ask you a question. And because I know you really well, I think I know the answer, right? But I would never. This is so important. I didn't want to make any assumptions about it. Now, by the way, you can only say that if that's true, right? And I immediately thought, like, okay, well, what if they said, oh, that's interesting. Tell me what you think the answer is. You better be prepared, right? So we have a real rule here, like, think through these questions. We only say things that are true. We can't say things that are lies and call it marketing. We can't, I know other people can do that, but we can't. So only say that if it's true. But I bet if you've been working with somebody for 7 years, even if you've never explicitly had the conversation about goals, you know them well enough to know what's important to them, right? You probably have some sense. So you say that, Michael, I know we've been working together we've been working together for 7 years now, and I just wanted to ask you a question. And I think I know the answers, but this is so important, I didn't want to make any assumptions. And then dive into whatever question you've decided is your discovery question. So it could be, the one I use is the smash up of Bill Bacharach and Simon Sinek's work. So why is money important to you? If you're familiar with George Kinder's amazing work, like, you can use Kinder's questions. Dan Sullivan's, we've had a whole episode on these questions. Dan Sullivan's question about if we're meeting 3 years from now, right? So whatever it is you're using as your discovery question, just dive in. I'd like to have a quick, Michael, we've been working together for 7 years. Just want to have a quick conversation with you. Now, I think I know what you're going to say, right? Because we've been working together, but it's so important. I didn't want to make any assumptions. So let me just ask you, we're asking all of our clients this. If we were meeting 3 years from today on, September 3rd, 2023, what would need to happen in order for you to feel like this relationship's been a success? Then you take notes. And at the end of that, you just go, oh, cool. Thank you very much. I'll probably be using this information. Like, that's really helpful because it sort of gives me a lens. That's my favorite way to say this. It sort of gives me a lens through which to view our work together. And so we'll make sure we review this again when we meet next time. Thanks for coming in today. Right? So we didn't make any, what we normally want to do is, like, I'm changing the way we're doing. Like, we want to make a big announcement, put a banner up, have some logos, design a thing. Like, you don't have to do any of that. We're a planning firm. We talk about goals. We have pictures of lighthouses and compasses on our brochures. So we don't do that. We just start making the transition. That's the best way I know to do it.
And so then what happens at the next meeting when they come in?
Right. Then it's moved to the top of the agenda.
Okay.
So we can still do some of the other stuff we're doing. I think if this takes you 2 or 3 reviews to wean them off of the old thing and get them to your ideal client review, fine.
So am I trying to cue them up to say, like, hey, we never really done an in-depth comprehensive plan for you. So, like, next meeting, we're going to dive in and do a full plan for you that we've never done before. Like, are you building up that direction? Or are you just trying to have some planning-y conversations, and then maybe in the next meeting they'll say, like, hey, I have more questions and I would like to delve into this further. And you're like, oh, well, that's awesome, because we totally do comprehensive financial planning here. Like, how?
Yeah, it's a really good point, and let's clarify it. I think that if you think about at least my thoughts on planning, right? Real, what I like to term, and you guys can all throw things at me, but real financial planning is this idea of, look, we don't have to get super specific 40-page intake forms filled out, right? Initially, we can just make sure. I would be surprised if somebody you're working with for 7 years and you said, we do financial planning now. I would be surprised if the answer in their heads, maybe even out of their mouths, was, well, I kind of thought we were sort of doing, like, I kind of think they don't know what that means.
Right.
So I think you just say, if in that first time, the conversion meeting, you could leave a half an hour, 20 minutes. If we were going to meet 3 years from now, why is money important to you? George Kinder's, whatever. And then you ask some questions like, hey, if you just keep going. If you were to give me, like, based on what you just said, if we met 3 years from now, these things would need to happen. Gosh, I think what I heard was this, and this, like, I want to have this much money saved. Would it be like, if I listed those out, would you call those goals? Like, are those your top goals? Right? So instead of saying, what are your goals? You use the conversation you just had to help them frame up some goals. Right. Now they walk out, you've had a little bit of a statement of financial purpose conversation. Like, you've framed up some goals. In the next meeting, you can say, look, based on what you said last time, remember you told me that if we met 3 years from now, you wanted this, and this to happen. Look, I put together a little bit of work to just give you a sense of, where we are in that progress, where we are in terms of
and that means, like, you plug some data into some planning software and, like, you're bringing a projection in. I mean, just when you say, like, well, I've done a little work, what am I going to be bringing into the client?
What is it? The 17.2B or whatever that calculator was we used to use?
HP12C.
Yeah, whatever. That's the reverse Polish one, right?
Yes.
And not that one, the other one that goes the other direction.
Oh, the 10B. No, you got to learn 12C.
17C.
You're just throwing numbers out now.
I'll take your 10B and match you with a 17C. So I know that this is really hard for a lot of us to, like, you can use that same financial planning software to produce what you would think of as a ballpark idea of where we are, right? You don't have to. Now, look, you could do this differently. You could sit down with a client and go, we've been working with you for 7 years. It's been amazing. And guess what we're doing? Like, we just found some amazing new software. We do financial plans now. Let's start. I don't think that works as well as just slowly introducing them to this idea of, let's get really clear about your values and your goals. I can take those goals based on what I know about you. And you can say in that next meeting, hey, I assume some things about your income. Let me just double check that real quick. Is it 250? I'm sorry, it's 170. Okay. You know what I mean? You can use that as an opportunity to just get more clarification from them, rather than sit down with a 40-page intake form and say, fill this out. This is how we do things now. That's the way I've always approached it. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, it reminds me, I had talked to a firm last year that was going through a version of this transition, and I think was kind of struggling with the same thing, that this, even down to, like, so they wanted to start doing full plans for clients. And the part they actually got stuck on was, like, how do I give a data intake form for a client who's already been on board for a bunch of years? Because they're like, don't you already know all this stuff? And, like, well, the truth is, no, not all of it. And I can certainly explain why I wouldn't know all of it. But they'll be like, well, cool. Like, fill out the parts you know, and then I'll fill in the rest. It's like, oh, I don't actually want to show you how many blanks are still going to be on this form. Like, like they sort of got stuck on the, again, like, how do I get the data for the plan? Because I want to start doing a plan, but it's just actually socially awkward to reflect, like, how many gaps there could be in a long-time client that we weren't doing planning for in the past.
You've now gone into a place that we may not be able to cover in this. So you can just tell me, because I don't believe in giving clients data intake forms.
All right, we don't have to go there. We can go there next time. This was only the context of how are we getting through this with the existing client. So what they ended up doing was they were Money Guide Pro users. So they started pulling Money Guide Pro into the meetings to do, they've kind of got a quick start, take take the client through a guided process, a couple of questions, really basic information, click out some goals and enter it in. And so what they actually did was they turned the controls over to the client. They're like, I'd love to go through this process with you. You just kind of enter a couple of things. I'm going to guide you through this. I think you'll learn some interesting stuff about your planning and how you're progressing towards your goals. And they gave the keyboard and the mouse to the client and let them start plugging things into the little money guide intake form. And so, they put their information in, like most people can punch their information in relatively quickly. And just, it was by making it interactive, they didn't have to do this whole, give me the data so I can put it into the software, except I didn't want to ask about all the data because that was an awkward moment. They just put the planning software in the conference room, started doing it more collaboratively, interactively with the client, and let the client steer, because it also meant they started plugging in a bunch of their details in the process. And of course, once the planning software, you have it now for future reference, right? And like when the client types in, income 250, it's like, oh, you got a raise. Like, that's awesome. I didn't realize you were up to 250 now. Never mind that I wasn't actually sure how much you made before, but like, that looks awesome. Yeah. And like, just, it made it easier for him to have the conversation.
I love that. And I think this just points to something I think is important for us to I think it's important in the context of this conversation. Look, financial planning is an iterative process, right? And we can let go of the false sense of precision. So I would say, especially as you pointed to the Money Guide Pro, sort of like quick version, like, let's just see if you're in the ballpark. Guess. Have the client guess. It's okay. Like, this is just the start of this ongoing relationship called financial planning. So that's how I would handle that.
Yeah. Well, and I think to me that's kind of the biggest takeaway of this whole discussion. When we start talking about, like, I haven't been doing planning, now I'm going to start doing more planning. I got a license to eMoney or Money Guide Pro or Right Capital or whatever it is. Like, we're going to start doing this for all of our clients now. I think the thing that we start building up in our heads is like, I got to start gathering comprehensive data and doing comprehensive plans with the whole printout and everything for all my clients now going forward. And what I think you're highlighting, at the core of the conversation of how you set this up is, you don't have to treat this as though we go from, we weren't doing planning to now we do full printed plan outputs for every client when they come in their annual review. Just take the next annual review, hold a little bit of time at the end to start asking some of these probing questions, take the next review, follow up on those questions, do a really lightweight planning projection, because you're not going to have the data in detail for more, but do something, because it's still more than what the client's ever seen from you. So it's actually a big step forward. Have a conversation about that. If you do it with the software up on the screen in the conference room, if they say, oh no, actually that's not right, my number's this, like, cool, well, let's enter that right now. And we'll get that updated now. Now we're doing planning live interactively. And what you may end out with is you will get there. It might take a bunch of meetings, which I think is anticlimactic for a lot of us. We're like, I'm going to do planning now and focus on planning now. Carl's like, yeah, so start doing it. And then like maybe over the next 3 years of meetings, you'll be doing a lot of planning work for the client. Like, it goes in more gradually. I think just recognizing, like, when the client when you haven't been doing that, anything more is actually a change and a positive step forward for the advisor-client relationships. Like, don't make it bigger than it needs to be. You can get there much more gradually.
Yeah, and it's okay too to say, hey, you know what? There's some interesting things came up today. I think it might be useful, or a follow-up email afterwards. Hey, some interesting things came up in our meeting today. It might be useful for us to get together again next month. Like, you could, if you wanted to, you could speed that process up a little bit. But I love the distinction here between don't create a plan, do planning, right? So like, you just start engaging them in this process called planning. Don't create a plan, do planning, right? And I think that to me is what we've described. I like that's amazing. And I'm so fun to hear this kind of stuff making its way through the industry. And maybe just a quick note to everybody, like, you are doing such good work, right? If you're thinking about this, please give yourself a little bit of a break to just realize, like, you're among a small select group, like, doing really amazing work. and the people need you more than ever. And they need you for this iterative, their lives are changing, their plans should be changing. So you can feel comfortable adapting and progressing and making changes. Just do it like you would as a human. You know, like, it's okay. The people trust you. You're doing amazing work. And frankly, thanks, right? Like, it gives me hope in our industry, our profession, excuse me.
Profession within industry.
Exactly.
Conversation for another day. We did an episode about this. Go back and listen to our prior episode about industry versus profession.
Yes, for sure. What episode's that?
All right, that one I don't remember offhand.
Okay, perfect.
I would have to Google that. But if you Google financial planning industry versus profession, you will get answers from us.
Perfect. Thanks, Michael.
Awesome. Thank you, Carl.